Good morning. Welcome to the 2022 Legislative Breakfast of the St. Paul chapter of MICAH, the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing. I'm Elaine Terone, a MICAH member from St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in St. Paul. We have an exciting program for you this very cold morning, so get your hot coffee and donuts ready. Thanks to all of you for joining us from many faith communities. And especially, we would like to thank those elected officials on this slide and their staff who have taken time out of their busy schedule to be with us this morning, even if some cannot stay for the full 90 minutes. This morning, we are going to begin with a faith reflection from Pastor Hans Jorgensen of St. Timothy Lutheran Church in St. Paul. Pastor Jorgensen.
Thanks so much for the welcome and for hosting this event. Every year I get to learn something new and appreciate all the energy. Thanks for sharing. In Christian scriptures, in the Gospel of John, Jesus told his disciples, "In my Father's house, there are many rooms, and I go to prepare a place for you." As I hear that scripture, it seems clear that God's house is spacious with lots of room because we all, no matter our background or status, we all need home. Let's take a moment to pray. Gracious God, with your spacious house, empower us so that all people may have a safe home in which to dwell, and give us spacious hearts that we may make room for one another in grace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Jorgensen. And now, Elaine Eyre, a MICAH member from St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, is going to take 10 minutes to provide some data and historical background on the impact of institutional racism on the housing scene in St. Paul today.
Hi, I'd like you to please take a moment to read the information on the current racial disparities in the Twin Cities today. Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing, MICAH, was founded in 1988 in response to an accelerating homeless crisis. MICAH works with congregations, faith leaders, and community partners to increase the awareness and need for affordable housing and to work to undo racism and build regional equity. MICAH lives out the prophetic voice that calls us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. MICAH envisions a metropolitan area where everyone, without exception, has a safe, decent, affordable home to live in. MICAH works with Freedom from the Streets, a 501c3 nonprofit that works directly with people who are homeless and previously homeless. Freedom from the Street does outreach by providing food, clothing, blankets, and offering resources, information. They work to give a voice to the homeless. Janelle Freeman Anderson, the founder and president of Freedom from the Streets, is also a MICAH board member. I'd like to start this morning with the premise that homelessness is inextricably linked to systemic racism. Racial equity must be prioritized in our work to end and prevent homelessness. In 2021, the Black population in St. Paul was 15.1%, or 48,134 people. The Twin Cities is one of the whitest metropolitan areas in the United States. The large housing equity gap between whites and people of color in Minnesota is not an accident. It started when racial covenants, redlining, predatory lending, and the destruction of the thriving Rondo community to build I-94 occurred. Black businesses owners lost their businesses. Black homeowners lost their homes and were denied the right to live where they wanted once they were displaced. It destroyed their vibrant social structure that had existed for years. Realtors, housing developers, city, county, state, and federal governments, banks, and racist citizens all had and have a part in this. The impact of these racist policies continues to negatively impact communities of color today. The opportunity for a person of color back then to buy a home in a safe neighborhood that offered amenities such as parks were denied to them. These families did not have the opportunity to build wealth and equity for themselves and for their future generations. 70% of whites in the Twin Cities own their own home. Some have second homes or a cabin. And this has happened because of being able to build up wealth and equity, compared to 24% of Black families who own their own home. The majority of renters in St. Paul are Black Americans, Brown, Asian, Latino, Indigenous, and are other people of color. Many of these families are paying more than 30 to 50% of their income on housing costs, which means they don't have money to provide basic needs for themselves and their families. They often have to live in unsafe housing and pay more in rent if they have an eviction record, a criminal record, or a record with child protective services. There are more children of color in child protection system than white children, even though we live in a state and a city that is predominantly white. These daily struggles exasperate those living with pre-existing mental illnesses, and the daily stresses contribute to an increase in mental health issues, which are not addressed properly because of poverty. One of the main reasons I'm involved with MICAH is because of my faith. I believe that we are all children of God, and we should all be treated with dignity and respect. I can't change the institutional racism that occurred in the past, but as a white person, I have an obligation to right the wrong of the grave sin of racism. I'm not going to be silent about institutional racism that exists today. It angers me that people of color and their families are intentionally kept in poverty and discriminated against because of their color of their skin. Even poor white people face discrimination for the simple fact that they are poor. In 2021, in the 2021 state legislative session that should have addressed public safety concerns, instead it was rife with laws and decisions that were racist. Even after the murders of George Floyd, Philando Castile, Dante Wright, and countless other Black men in our country and our state, Republicans in the Minnesota House and Senate intentionally blocked any anti-racist public safety legislation that came before them. At the April 15th, 2021 meeting of the Minnesota Senate Omnibus Judiciary and Public Safety Finance and Policy Committee, Senator Omar Fattah, DFL from Minneapolis, requested an amendment to enable the Minnesota Post Board to revoke the licenses of police affiliated with white supremacist groups. The Republican chair of this committee, Senator Warren Limmer, stated, "Of course, everyone in this committee does not want police officers affiliated with white supremacist groups, but this isn't germane to the committee because it doesn't deal with finances." Senator Jeremy Miller, who is now the Minnesota State Majority Leader, also stated it wasn't germane. Therefore, the language was not included in Senate File 970. Senators Limmer and Miller's responses are despicable, to say the least. How in the world was this language not germane? This committee is responsible for jurisdiction to bills relating to law enforcement and public safety. Do any of you wonder why the incarceration rates in the Twin Cities are incarceration rates of Blacks in the Twin Cities is 11 times those of whites? In 2020, the city of St. Paul provided language for stable, accessible, fair, and equitable housing tenant protection ordinance to the city council members, St. Paul City Council members. The city council unanimously passed the 5 tenant protections. This housing policy would have protected the 83% of Black households, many of them living in poverty, and 41% of white households that rent in St. Paul. These 5 tenant protections would have greatly reduced rental housing discrimination. Unfortunately, this ordinance never saw the light of day because St. Paul-based real estate equities and landlords sued the city. Now, instead of the city standing up to these entities, the city lawyer thought it would be best if they didn't implement this ordinance. Unfortunately, it didn't pass with city council. It was voted down 4-3 in repealing the Safe Housing Tenant Protection Ordinance. The 3 city council members that voted in favor not to repeal this ordinance were Mitra Jalali, Dai Tal, and Nelsie Yang. By not implementing this ordinance, the city allowed institutional racism to continue. In November, this past November 2021, the majority of St. Paul voters voted for rent stabilization, which would have protected people, renters, from being evicted from their homes and there were other things that were really important for renters. The Minnesota Housing Multi-Association, MMA, raised millions of dollars to fight this. This ordinance is now being challenged, even though the majority of voters voted in favor of this. The ordinance is being challenged by Mayor Carter and the majority of the city council members. Once again, the majority of the council and the mayor are allowing big, powerful, and rich realtors, association developers, and MMHA to avoid doing what the majority of voters wanted. Institutional racism is rearing its ugly head again, and the majority of our city council and the mayor are allowing it. Racial inequality and bias are a big problem to overcome, but it is one that can be changed by citizens educating their elected officials and pressing for change. We have to work together to end institutional racism. To remove racist policy, ordinances, and laws, we need to understand why they were put in place and who has benefited from them. The majority of us who are white have not had the experiences that people of color, low-income people, or people who are homeless have had. In order to bring about positive anti-racist policies and laws, we need to make sure that those who will be affected by the decisions of elected officials are sitting at the table to share their stories, so officials will incorporate their input in what will help them and not harm them in their decision-making. We all need to be asking, how do our systems, policies, and social structure combine to create homelessness, keep people poor and make it near impossible for them to better their lives and the lives of their families? Our past and current racist discriminatory policies and laws have kept in place the large inequalities faced by people of color and poor whites. It causes negative and detrimental effects on their health, untreated mental illness, and lower life expectancy, increased number of infant and maternal deaths. They cause poor educational outcomes and increase the number of people who are incarcerated or have an eviction or a criminal record. These records prevent people who have served their time to be able to live in safe, stable, accessible housing. It is critical that we give these people a second chance to live their lives and to continue to move forward. It is no wonder why we have people in our community that don't feel or hope that things will get better. Why are we okay with this? Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, for giving us this sweeping history of institutional racism and housing in our town. We appreciate your emphasis on the importance of having low-income Black, Brown, and other people of color at the table when housing policies are made. Our next speaker is Janelle Freeman Anderson, who is on the MICAH board and is also the founder of Freedom from the Streets and No More Streets. Janelle will share her personal experience of the barriers she has faced as a Black American mom in St. Paul. Thank you, Janelle.
Hello, everybody. I want to let everybody know I am from St. Paul, born and raised. I moved from St. Paul because of the barriers. I'm going to tell my story. I had it hard in St. Paul, trying to find housing, going to door, trying to rent something from somebody. I found out that I had a record on me from Child Protection. I didn't know that Child Protection could stop you from getting housing. Because I asked the landlord, one of the landlords, and asked him why I can't get housing, and I wanted to live in a nice housing, decent housing. But instead, I lived in a housing that everybody know that a man named Vu was a landlord in St. Paul, and I bet y'all all know him. And at the time, I had 6 kids. I had 6 kids living in a 1-bedroom. Actually, it was like a 1-bedroom, but it was big. It was dining room, so I turned the dining room into a room. One day, the state came and looked at the house. They wanted to look at the house because I think that Vivu was a slumlord. Well, I know he was a slumlord, but he's the only one that would take people in. He was the only one that take people in, and you have to pay 2 times the rent to get in to a house or a slumlord. And one day when they came and looked at the house, my kids hid. My oldest daughter hid my four kids in a closet, so they won't see it. Because back then, I don't know. I mean, I know y'all know this, but they was cracking down on housing and how many people is in your house and all this stuff. I don't know if you noticed, but you can't afford housing in Minnesota. I don't care if you say that the east side is more cheaper. I mean, y'all can say that all y'all want, but unless y'all gets in my shoes. But yeah, I experienced it, and I had to move from there because also, if you don't know, if you don't have a record, you will have a record with Child Protection. And I didn't know that you can have a record for 10 years that can stop you from having housing, that can stop you from having a job. I was a nurse and I lost my job. I was making good money and I lost that. St. Paul, I am really kind of scared of St. Paul, but I'm in St. Paul right now with my group, trying to work on issues so one day I can come back to St. Paul and be safe and be feeling like I can breathe again. But right now it is so scary to St. Paul because, man, they say if you don't have a record, you will have one in St. Paul. That's the thing. If you don't have a record, you will have one in St. Paul, and it will keep you down. And that's the thing about us, that they say you will keep you down, and it will. And I just going to say my mom passed away, and all my family want me to come to St. Paul to do their thing. I am scared of St. Paul. I am sorry. Until y'all change your ways and change your things, because my granddaddy was the capital. He was he built the capital. He was the but y'all know y'all have this white man, this Caucasian man on there. And, he cleaned the Capitol, but you don't have my granddaddy on there. His last name is Blakely. You don't have my granddaddy on there. So, that's kind of racism that we deal with. You won't show us. we have to go search for us to find out what kind of history that we have. Yes, St. Paul got a real problem with child protection. With child protection, when I moved out of state and then moved back and moved to Minneapolis, I didn't have a problem. But when I came back to St. Paul, it's like they on your heels. And I'm going to say this before I go. If you give the money that you give to the people that take care of our kids when you take our kids away from us, then we would have money to deal with too, to clean our kids' clothes, to do everything that we need to do. You know, we see these people with new cars and stuff like that. They got our kids that's taking them to school and all this stuff. I ain't never got my kids taken away, but I'm always was dealing with St. Paul, with issues with St. Paul. And like I told people about the shelter, nobody listens. Nobody listens in St. Paul. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Janelle. Thank you for showing us some of the barriers that a Black mom with a child protection record faces when searching for affordable housing for her children in St. Paul. Now we're going to hear from some of our elected representatives. Minnesota State Representative Athena Hollins, Ramsey County Attorney John Choi, and St. Paul City Council member Mitra Jalali, 3 levels of government represented. We asked our panelists this question: what are you doing to make it easier for people who are trying to rent with a record of eviction, prison, or child protection? Representative Hollins?
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here. And to hear that powerful testimony from Janelle was just fantastic. I really appreciate her being here and being willing to speak about her experiences. At the state level, you know, I can only speak for the House, but the Minnesota House has a number of different bills that we have put out regarding trying to help with tenant protections. I know that Representative Hassan is carrying several bills about giving notice for pre-eviction, a 14-day notice. There's also some expungement reform to help folks get their the evictions or off of their records, especially if they're older than 3 years. We know that that is generally very prohibitive when we look at folks who are trying to find housing. And also, you know, I think we are, in part of that bill, there is providing more discretion to the judges to allow them to expunge it, you know, before 3 years if they find that there's a change in circumstances where this would not be a reasonable predictor of future tenant behavior. So really trying to provide some more leeway in those situations where people, you know, have suffered from an eviction and they need housing now. I know in particular, we've talked a lot about a bill to prohibit allowing past criminal records to influence whether or not someone can be rented to. And I think that's a really important conversation to have. I asked around at the House, and actually nobody was carrying a bill regarding this in this session or in this biennium. So because of that, I actually decided to have that bill go ahead and be drafted and be chief author on it. So we will be bringing that this session. But it's important to note that not only are past convictions used, but prior charges can be used as well to prevent somebody from being rented to. And I know that we've brought bills in the past to remedy this, and the trouble really is the GOP, especially in the Senate. And I would say it's not just a political working, but also a personal situation. A lot of our GOP colleagues are landlords or housing providers, as they call themselves. And they are really reticent to relinquish any control that they might have over their ability to rent. So it's an uphill battle. And I think a lot of our GOP colleagues would argue that we do rent to people who have criminal backgrounds or criminal histories. But the reality is they'll rent to their nephew who has a criminal history, but they will not rent to, the Black and brown folks who live in our communities and who are part of our communities because of that, systemic bias that we just heard about earlier. So we know that this is stuff that we absolutely have to change. It's work that we have to do, and it's definitely an uphill battle. I also wanted to call out a couple of great bills that Representative Herr, who's on the line, I think, is carrying regarding providing advance notice for repairs and trying to reduce court filing fees for tenant remedies. I think some of the things that we see a lot with our constituents is people who are in these situations who might normally fight against it, but are not able to do it just because of the court filing fees being so expensive. And so trying to figure out how we can make it easier to, help people to fight these unfair processes is something that's incredibly important. So it's really a systemic issue that we have to look at from every single angle. And I feel really fortunate that we have you all here to help us with that fight. So with that, I'll stop talking and pass it on to a different level of government.
Thank you so much, Representative Hollins. And now we would like to hear from John Choi, who's our Ramsey County attorney.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. First of all, thank you to MICAH for this really great invitation to be with all of you today to talk about some really important issues as we head into the legislative session. And it's also really great to be here with really great elected colleagues in the state legislature, as well as on the county board, and also on our St. Paul City Council. I think that we are very well represented here in St. Paul, and it's been a real privilege for me to be able to work on a lot of the justice and public safety issues that we're trying to advance. One of the things that I am trying to do is to really change the role of the prosecutor. I think historically and traditionally, prosecutors have been people that have kind of processed situations and cases. The police come across situations, and then we charge those cases, and then we process them in the system. And I believe that the role of the prosecutor really has to be grounded in representing our community's values and to do justice, right? And so in many ways, I've been called out by the Republicans in the legislature for taking on a more aggressive role around improving the quality of justice for all people. And one of the areas in which that I'm just really passionate about is to recognize that when people come through the criminal justice system and they get a conviction, and then there's a sanction. It might be a probation, it might be prison, whatever it might be. But when the person has done everything that we have asked them to do, we have to stop punishing people. And we have way too many collateral consequences in our laws today. One of the biggest collateral consequences of criminal convictions is actually the conversation that we're having right now, which is about the access to housing. And in addition to that, there's other even more serious consequences. So for those who are not United States citizens, but they're permanent residents, a felony conviction can subject you to being deported to a country that you may have no connection to whatsoever. And so these are the things that, as a prosecutor, that I'm trying to change. So we have a collateral consequences policy where we ask all of our prosecutors to take that into account as they charge cases, as they resolve cases, as they seek certain sentences. And we work out ways to mitigate those collateral consequences, especially in the context of deportation and removal from this country. I'm also proud to say that I believe that the prosecutor has a role to play in expungements. We should not just be reactive and wait for people to figure out how to expunge your criminal record by going online and reading all the instructions. And those instructions are like the instructions to build a space shuttle. You have to serve all of these individuals. And quite frankly, I think that in my office, should take on the responsibility of helping people. And so back in October of 2019, we launched helpsealmyrecord.org, which is a partnership between Washington County and Ramsey County. And a year later, the state of Minnesota, through Keith Ellison's office and Minnesota Philanthropy Partners, we were able to raise money so that we could launch this site statewide. But in both of those instances, in October when we launched those things and made it public, the next day we had literally hundreds, like 600 in my office alone, of people who applied to get their records expunged, right? And so what we do is we take on the burden of actually filling out the forms and do prosecutor-initiated expungements for people. We are also now putting that into our regular practice. So if you've been diverted, we automatically expunge your records, all of those things that I think the prosecutor has a role to play. Because again, once people have done everything that we have asked them to do, we have to stop punishing them. We have a society that is very focused on punishment, and we don't think about the values that we say that we're all about in our places of worship. When we talk about reconciliation, redemption, rehabilitation, those things have to be alive and well. And of course, we talked a lot today, Elaine talked about the racial injustices and the discrimination that exists within our systems. I think the first thing that we have to do is to acknowledge that those things actually exist, right? And then from there, we can start unpacking a whole bunch of things. And so as a part of our work, we are centering racial equity and thinking about the prosecutor's role, not to perpetuate and incentivize these practices. So one particular area that I'm very proud of is that we said out loud that we are just not going to be involved with and incentivize and perpetuate the furthering of a police practice that yields no public safety benefit. Once in a while, it might. But that's on the issue of non-public safety stops. The way that policing happens in this community, as well as across the country, is that certain neighborhoods are policed much, much more. And one of the tactics that is used is when there's a non-public safety issue, police will pull somebody over to do a further investigation. And oftentimes the police might ask the person for consent to search the vehicle. Think about how degrading that is. To be suspected of criminal activity when there's no reason to have any suspicion at all. We have to recognize that 98% of the situations involving those types of stops, they don't yield anything. So it's less than 2% in which they actually find some form of contraband, whether it's drugs or guns or whatever it might be. And that has been used to justify this practice that has harmed Black and brown communities across this nation. And so as a prosecutor, I stood up and said that I would not perpetuate that and would not prosecute cases that result from those traffic stops. Now, of course, because of that, I have now become a target by the GOP and many police interests. But I know that this is the right thing to do because if we want to improve the quality of justice for all people, we have to take seriously the voices and the things that are being said by those particular communities. And in fact, I think we can't have justice transformation until all of us have to stop and listen to what is being said by those who are most impacted by the violence and most impacted by policing in this country. And so that's some of the work that we're doing. But of course, I do all of that in great partnership with many of the elected officials here on this call. So I just want to thank all of you for your support and the work that's being done. One thing that I wanted to call out about what Janelle Freeman said that I didn't know about is this notion that child protection records can be utilized as a barrier to housing. A child protection proceeding is a civil proceeding. I don't believe that should be, we should be punishing people for whatever the outcome is. And so I wasn't aware that could be used as a way to ban somebody from housing if you had some form of a child protection record. In fact, I think some of those records should actually be private. So I don't know if there's any legislators that are interested in talking about that issue, but I'd love to learn more about it. And if there's anything that I can do to support that effort, I'd like to do that because we should not be using civil proceedings as a way of further punishment to people or to have barriers for them. So thank you so much. And it's great to be here with all of you and to do this work on behalf of and to represent my community.
Thank you so much, John Choi. This is very exciting. Thank you for listening and speaking. Next in line is Mitra Jalali, who is a St. Paul City Council member. Mitra?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, MICAH, for reconvening us all again. It's become a ritual of mine as a councilwoman these last few years to come together with you all, and I miss being in the basement of a St. Anthony Park, St. Paul church in my ward with donuts and coffee, but this is better. I appreciate everyone being here this morning. Personally, today I am feeling the brutal cold and just the energy and the sort of challenges with morale that I think so many of us have felt just fighting this fight day after day through really, really heavy structural barriers. And I just want to send my good wishes to everyone and try to take a human moment for that. I am happy to speak to the question of what are we doing at our level of government to make it easier for people with records to rent. But also I have to admit, when the question came up on the screen, it kind of hit me in the gut because as some of the opening speakers mentioned, I and my colleagues, some of whom are on this call, thank you fellow council members for being here, we spent multiple years developing, formulating, working to pass and working to implement the Safe Housing Tenant Protections Agenda. This process was multiple years of community engagement. It was, many rounds of legislative review through our city council process. MICAH and so many people on this call showed up to fight for that. It is also especially personal to me because I was both very much at the epicenter of that process as a then new renter on the city council. And it also, we all went through in May and June 2020, what I would characterize as a fairly life-changing set of experiences in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and seeing the multiple emergencies all unfolding at once in our community. The everyday emergency of housing instability, the everyday emergency of systemic racism and violence in policing, the everyday emergency of a pandemic and a public health crisis that's disproportionately impacting community members of color. So these things all happened at the same time. And I feel like I'm trying to push myself to do a better job to just be honest about that. Because that is what we were doing. We were showing up to meetings and hearings at City Hall as all of that was happening. Like I was going to a food drive on one day and then coming back to work on amendments with community partners the next. And the reason I talk about all this is because today it can feel kind of reduced to like just a mention. It's just, we had safe housing, now we don't. But so many people on this call poured like hundreds of hours into that process over many years, council members, community members alike. And the reason we did that is because our tenant protections policy, which we are working to come back at and pass another round of, which I could talk about, but there were some key provisions in it that specifically aimed at easing barriers to housing access and mitigating discrimination that people with criminal records face in our community. The first was a major reform of tenant screening criteria. So setting limits on look-back periods, making it unlawful to discriminate against an applicant for things that are, expunged or no longer a crime in the state of Minnesota, all kinds of reasons why you could have something on your record. And this ordinance made it so that you did not actually have the ability as a landlord to screen somebody out because of varying aspects of their personal criminal record. It also made reforms to people accessing housing at the application stage, like you could not only make someone's credit score the reason for denying them housing. It directed landlords to make sure that the rental deposit history, which is that first check that people make first when they are trying to balance their budget every month, The rent comes first for so many families overwhelmingly, even when there is so many other needs. And if someone has consistent rental payment history, you should not be excluding them on the basis of a credit score, which, as we know, is an arbitrary and flawed measure in so many ways of someone's ability to economically contribute. The other piece that was in this policy was the just cause notice provision, which would have given families basically the ability to receive and notice a written explanation if their lease was being non-renewed. It asked that the landlord identify 1 of 10 determined just causes, most of them very much in line with state statute already, like non-payment of rent after a certain amount of time, and a number of other things that are not in conflict with the law, but they were deemed in conflict with landlords' interest to discriminate at will and make it very easy to just put somebody out in a market where we have a housing shortage and renters who face systemic discrimination and racism in many ways. They get screened out through the attitude of, oh, you're just a risky tenant. You're just a risky renter. We're not so sure about you. You seem difficult. And difficult can be like, I was a person of color and I had people over one time and we were loud and someone complained about me. Difficult can be, I was late a couple days because I worked multiple jobs and it was hard to get my payment in. These are all the ways in which white people and property owners have the ability to judge our lives for trying to make it in the way that we are forced to participate in this economy and then get to decide if we have a home or not. It is really messed up. I know that everyone on this call knows that, but I just feel extra angry this morning in my gut. So I guess I'm telling you how I feel about it. So all these things, right, were part of the policy that we worked to pass, exhaustively crafted, so many rounds of amendments. The pandemic hit, and we all were sent to there was a stay-at-home order issued right after we had initially launched the process. So then we continued this process from, remote virtual environment. This was significantly delayed by the pandemic when people were already getting so many things happening to them, to their housing, eviction moratoria, all these things, right? I just think it's important to really situate the process by which we were pursuing this policy, which I really view as like a human rights and civil rights policy. It makes it all the more discouraging that we faced a repeal of this policy when a group of landlords sued the city of St. Paul and a judge issued an injunction against our policy. We had to make a decision to keep the ordinance and keep fighting or repeal. I personally strongly believe we should stick by the work we had done and keep advancing it. And that is how we got to where we are. So, and I'm getting a notice to make sure that we can wrap and have enough time for everything. But I just want to say that I'll speak in a bit to what's going on with the next round, but the fight for tenant protections at the city isn't over. And if there's one thing I could ask you all to also pay attention to, in addition to tracking Safe Housing 2.0, it is that we have also had a budget item in multiple city cycles now, and it's to fund a program called Returning Home St. Paul that allows participating landlords, tenants, community service partners all working together supportively to access a pool that really helps if there is a need to support folks who are trying to get back into housing and rebuild their lives. There's additional funds available if there is challenges with the tenancy or a difficulty renting in some other way. And that's a way to kind of support everyone in the equation and deal with the monetary realities of having rental properties. So this is something that we funded as a city, and philanthropy has supported us. Please don't lose sight of that in our budget conversation that I know many of you track annually. Much more to say, but I will yield my time. Thank you, everybody, and appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Mitra, John, and Athena, for all the things that you do to pursue justice in housing. We do have a little time left to give some opportunities to some other elected representatives and their staff to briefly respond to similar questions. We're going to begin with city representatives. Please take a minute to tell us what you are doing to bring back tenant protections, especially tenant screening reform in 2022.
All right, and thank you very much. Let me introduce myself. I'm John Slade. I'm the East Metro organizer for MICAH, and I'll be helping facilitate this section. I have put Jean, who is our timer, on Spotlight, and I want to thank absolutely everybody, elected officials and otherwise. We have a great turnout. Mitra was talking about the St. Anthony Park basement, and I think we had her and Alice Hausman and another council member there, and having nearly 20 folks at these three levels of government here is really wonderful. And so right now I see Mitra Jalali, Council Member Jalali, Council Member Nelsie Yang, Council Member Rebecca Naker, and Mai Zhang, who is the aide to Dai Tao. We are giving you an opportunity, if you so would like, to speak for a minute to this question. What are you doing to bring back tenant protections, especially tenant screening reforms, in 2022? So let's see, I've got all these different views going here. If anybody would like to speak up, who's a council member, please do.
Hey everyone, good morning. I'm Nelsie Yang. I'm the council member in Ward 6, and it's really great to be here with you all. Just wanted to let you know, I know how passionate all of us are in passing our tenant ordinance here, and we're really disappointed when it did get repealed. But just wanted you all to know that, like Councilmember Jalali and I, we continue to stay in touch with the organizers on the ground, especially the Housing Equity Now St. Paul, to continue building that foundation for this work moving forward, because we do need to pass a second version of the tenant ordinance as soon as possible to continue protecting our renters. So that's work that we are doing as we speak here.
Good morning, everyone. Rebecca Naker, St. Paul City Council Ward 2. I missed the church basement as well. I'm pretty sure it was a lot warmer than City Hall on a day like today. So it's good to see everyone here. I want to echo both Councilmember Jalali and Councilmember Yang. My frustration was deep and intense when the court put our ordinance under injunction, invalidating it. And I want our next tenant protections ordinance to work and to not be subject to lawsuits, and certainly not to successful lawsuits. Currently, the Minneapolis tenant protections ordinance is going through the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. And I have been closely in touch, as I know many of my colleagues have been, with our Office of Financial Empowerment and our City Attorney's Office to get updates on that case as it goes through, because what I understand from them is that once that case completes, we'll have a much better sense of how to design SAFE 2.0 to make sure that it can withstand any possible legal objection. But I also want to be clear that in the meantime, we're not just standing still. We're doing a number of other things that are related to tenant protections, because as all of us know, there's a lot of other work we need to do in terms of housing supply, for example. So our housing infill study, which we just completed the first phase of, we're moving on to a second phase, is going to help us create additional housing options, infill density in all of our neighborhoods, more affordable, small homes, accessory dwelling units, et cetera. We're also investing record amounts in affordable housing, and I need to stop. So there's a lot of other things we're doing.
Great. Mitra, would you like to say something as well?
Yeah, sorry, computer's being weird. I would just add in, thank you, Councilmembers Yang and Naker, that in terms of some other processes happening at the same time, Minneapolis and St. Paul had parallel provisions in our ordinances, and were sued by the same group, went through similar legal processes, and there is a decision that is expected on the provisions in the Minneapolis policy that are essentially the same as ours, that we are looking to understand whether and what precedents exist in the region legally in order to advance another round that is both willing to be ambitious and rigorous in our interpretation of what rights renters have, and also is aware of the existing precedent set by what can be, as people know, much more often conservative judiciary, that is disproportionately, like by design, set up to be skewed in favor of property owners and sort of real estate and other interests in less than individual renters. So we are tentatively hoping to see some guidance on that in the next month. And then that work already that's underway to do the preparation to think about engagement can happen before that and separate from that. But I want to just place that as something that that might be coming forth in the coming weeks and months. So thank you for tracking it, for asking us, and for supporting this process with us.
All right.
My Chong's hand.
Oh, yes, perfect. Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Mai Chong, aide to Councilmember Dai Tao. He sends his regrets and regards that he cannot be here due to another meeting. But I just want to appreciate and highlight the speakers who have spoken before. MICAH, thank you for hosting this and bringing community together. It's not very often that we get community, faith, and elected officials together here from all levels focused on this issue. So I would add that one of the things Councilmember Naker probably wanted to add on was about the huge investment that both the county and the city had placed in around the ARP funds, which is $74 million collectively to invest in deeply affordable housing at 30% AMI. That is huge, but that's also just a drop in the bucket. And I just want to encourage again for us to continue to call our elected officials, be vulnerable, share our stories about how these policies impact us, because we need reform. What good is it if we continue to build housing, but then the people in our communities cannot access it?
Yes.
And that includes tenant protections. And so we need reform. We need to continue lifting up those stories. So I just want to say thank you for sharing your stories. Let's keep doing it.
Excellent. So one of the things we do here is we do a little reporting back on what we heard. And the first council member to speak was Nelsie Yang. And Nelsie has been a strong supporter of many of these things. And I regret to say that my child brought me breakfast during Nelsie's birthday breakfast. It's my birthday. And so I heard that Nelsie is supportive of the tenant protections, but I wasn't able to get much more than that. Councilmember Naker is interested in tenant protections that are not subject to lawsuits that are waiting on the 8th Circuit, which is ruling in Minneapolis. And she also spoke about some of the other things that folks are doing on housing. Councilmember Jalali also mentioned the 8th Circuit precedents, and but did say that that there is a timeline of kind of learning in the next month, having more news and an interest in pushing that forward. And Dai Tao's aide, Mai Zhang, thank you very much for being here. Also pointed out that there was investment of American Rescue Plan money, and spoke kind of generally about the need to get those. So that's what I heard. So now I get to switch to my two computers because we're doing this.
Thank you very much, City Council members. Now we're going to move on to the county representatives who are present. And again, very briefly, take a minute if you're here, if you would like to tell us what you can do in 2022 to make access to affordable rental housing in St. Paul more racially equitable and just. John?
All right. We have a wonderful slate of Ramsey County folks here. I've seen Commissioner Tristamalis Castillo, Commissioner Tony Carter, Commissioner McDonough, and Commissioner Reinhardt, and Rafael Ortega Ken Ioso here. And so if any of you would like to speak to that, you've got a minute. I see Trista.
I'll hop in first because we actually have a lot of stuff that we're doing, and maybe my fellow commissioners can add and layer. But one of the things that's really important is through our Transforming Systems Together, our North Star group is really working on focusing on the issues that Janelle raised about child protection and how do we keep families together and not have that impact on their families long term that affects their housing. And so we are taking racial justice on head on at the county and in all of our programs, which will help with the renter issues around racial justice. So I'll start there, and maybe my other commissioners can hop in since we're limited on time.
Thank you, Trista.
Hi, this is Commissioner Tony Carter, and I just want to share thanks to all of you for being here on this call. I'd also just add that an aspect that continues to stand in the way of people, especially for housing, is our criminal justice system. And the connection of justice system fines and fees is an area that we are addressing. We're also looking at bail reform so that we know we can, through that avenue, assist to make funds available to people that have typically been tied up in their response to the justice system. You know, another area, of course, is workforce and continuing to address workforce needs of our community and training and preparation for the jobs that exist today and will into the future. So in addition to the combined funds that we put together with the city and our new levy for housing and a focus on continuing our support in those areas, these are collateral engagements in which we're involved. And thank you so much for your time today.
This is Victoria Reinhardt. I represent the northeast portion of Ramsey County, City of White Bear Lake, City of Maplewood, North St. Paul, and one precinct on the east side of St. Paul. And I think you can probably tell just by the number of commissioners that are on this call just how important this is to our board and our total commitment to making sure that we get everything that we can through the partnerships that we have, but the money, the HRA, and this is the first time in our history that Ramsey County HRA has had a levy. And so, and the support that we got for that when we had our first budget hearing, public comment budget hearing, it was all support for what we were doing. And, you know, the second one was other things as well. But I think that that also speaks to what our county wants to do. But it is all, you know, prosperity, opportunity, well-being, accountability through the lens of equity. Those aren't just words. That's how we do our work on the county board. And with that, I will let others speak.
I'll jump in real quick.
Is that Commissioner McDonough I hear?
Yep, Jim McDonough. Can you hear me, John?
You're very faint.
It's interesting. How's that? The microphone was pointing at the ceiling. So I'll jump in real quick. I know Trista, Victoria, Tony have shared some of the layers. What I'll do is add a couple pieces here. One thing I really want to call out is the county board has stood tall with John Choi as he's moved forward a lot of those initiatives through the county attorney's office. That partnership is extremely strong and important in the county, and John really highlighted a lot of the areas. As you hear, there's a lot of paths to barriers, right? And almost every path to housing, there's barriers. Well, one of the key things here as we move forward is with the CARES funding, the early federal funding, we invested $35 million to help our unsheltered in St. Paul and Ramsey County to ensure that they had a safe and warm spot to stay. That funding will terminate in May. We put together through the Continuum of Care and Heading Home Ramsey 4 priorities that we're advancing and looking for partners at the legislature, with the administration, with philanthropy and business to help fund that ongoing. Supporting families and the work that we've done at Provincial House with Interface, supporting the work that we did at Bethesda by adding 100 new beds there that are 24 hours a day. They don't have to leave in the morning and line up at night. Supporting the work that Freedom House and Listening House do in providing day services. And then a program that we've really aligned with St. Paul on called Familiar Faces, folks that we see a lot, and we just have not been able to find solutions to the issues that are putting them back out on the street. And with that, One last thing, I'm sure most of you have seen this, but I want to make sure we're calling it out because the deadline's coming. It was announced yesterday. The rent aid from the state is coming to an end for applications on Friday at 9 p.m. They're running out of money. And Commissioner Ho has announced any applications received before that will be processed. So we need to make sure we do everything we can for anybody who needs some of that state support to get into that pot, because we got to stop people from becoming homelessness. And this is one of those pots. Thanks, John.
I also know that Ken Ioso is here and is the aide for Commissioner Ortega. Ken, are you wanting to say anything?
I think I just want to say thanks. I'm sorry the commissioner had a family emergency, but I believe the commissioners spoke very well, so I feel no need to add to their comments.
All right. The Commissioner Matas Castillo talked a bit about the renter racial justice and program that they're working on that. Commissioner Carter also mentioned the criminal justice fines and fees work and the bail reform that the county is looking at, as well as the new levy and the new funds. Commissioner Reinhardt talked very much about the Ramsey County HRA levy, and in 2 days she will be presenting a little bit more at the Northeast chapter, MICAH Northeast chapter, suburban chapter, and spoke to the accountability and equitability lens. Commissioner McDonough spoke about how the county board supports Choi and a lot of the things that he's been doing, is aware of the barriers, and spoke to some of the shelter funding and the continuing shelter funding for Provincial House, Bethesda, and things like that, and also that the rent aid program is running.
Okay. So, thank you, John, for that summary. And now for our state level legislators, I'd like to take a minute, tell us what you can do in 2022 to make access for affordable rental housing more racially equitable and just. John? John, are you going to facilitate this again?
Yes, I am. I'll turn my mic on again. I also wanted to mention that Ben Elgin, I believe, from Senator Tina Smith's office was here, and we would be allowing him to speak. So earlier in this meeting, Representatives Alice Hausman, Aisha Gomez, Athena Hollins, Dave Pinto, Cowley Herr, Rena Moran, Senators Aaron Murphy and Sandy Pappas were here. And I'm not sure if anybody has popped in or popped out exactly, because there's so many folks here and it is a wonderful situation to have. But if anybody wants to speak up, I see Sandy Pappas, Senator Pappas.
Thank you very much. And thank you for this wonderful meeting. It was just really very intense and very important. So I, along with Senator Murphy, who was on the call earlier, we live in Republican land. So it is an uphill battle, but we are determined to work with our colleagues in the House who have a very ambitious agenda to see what we can do. And I think that for me, I think expungement and this issue with child protection records, which I was not aware of, could be a possibility to get Republican support, because the whole philosophy of redemption, certainly it's very Christian. Thank you very much, MICAH. And I think we could make that appeal to the Republicans to try to get their support. We try to be a partner. I want to be your partner, both with the city and with the county. Getting money for unsheltered residents is really important. And as Alice Hausman, who's on the call, will speak to the whole issue of more housing. And the governor has proposed $250 million in housing infrastructure bonds to build more houses to add to the market. The other area I thought that would be good to work on is the funding for legal services for low-income people. So once again, thank you, and I'll bow to my other colleagues.
All right. I see in the chat that Representative Alice Hausman, who is a longtime leader on these issues, has been called out. Alice, would you like to speak at this point?
Yes, I'll say a little more about tenant protection. Athena referenced that. We had last year, we heard all of the tenant protection bills in my committee. As you heard, we have lots of landlords who are members of our committee and members of the House, but we were able to pass all of the bills. Representative Hassan and others have provided wonderful leadership. I want to call out one issue, and that is eviction notice. 48 states have a requirement that there should be a notice of eviction. Minnesota is one of only 2 that does not. In the off-ramp for the eviction moratorium, we were able last year to accomplish a temporary eviction notice that expired in October. If you get a notice that you're going to be evicted, that gives you time to say, can I apply for Rent Help Minnesota? Is there rental assistance somewhere else? Or it allows you to find another place to live. So when you're evicted, you're not homeless. We were able to get that temporary one. All the feedback we got during the off-ramp of the eviction moratorium was that it was enormously helpful. So that goes to the top of my list. We need to accomplish a requirement for a notice of eviction.
Excellent. Representative Herr, are you available?
I am. Thank you, John. Good to see you all. And I really always enjoy this gathering. I'm just going to add on top of what Chair Hausman already spoke about. And I just want to applaud Chair Hausman because I'm sad that she's going to be leaving. She's fought really, really hard to have more investment into housing. And so we will sorely miss her when she is no longer here. I will just add that in addition to all the work that is being done on the tenant protection front and the bills that are being carried, the Posse Caucus, which is the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus, has met and we all put together a slate of ideas and bills that we want to put forward around addressing the disparities. And so it would be how do we appropriate funds to help people of color, BIPOC individuals, close the home ownership gap. We were also looking at additional funding and just understanding some of the disparities that exist within our communities and how to close those gaps, but looking specifically at different areas which lead into somebody's housing instability. And just to be very clear that we look at this work from an intersectional approach. And so I'm carrying, somebody can't have housing if they don't make a livable wage. So I'm carrying the phase-in wage to increase that, the state of Minnesota. We are also carrying bills that prevent source of income discrimination. And in addition to that, we are also carrying things like prohibiting an employer that you are looking for a job with from asking from your past pay, because we know that disproportionately impacts people of color and women and continues to keep them in a cycle of which they are not able to make more money. And so we are doing all of those things in addition to dealing with housing as well.
Excellent. I see that Representative Hollins is here. Also, Tina Smith's aide Ben is here. And Dave Pinto, quite a lot of folks still here yet. I'd like to, I see Ben from...
I'll defer to any state leaders if they want to go, otherwise happy to speak.
I'll put you on right now.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to tag along with our great state leaders here. I appreciate the opportunity to provide a federal perspective. I just want to share that Senator Smith sees her ongoing work on housing as being an issue of racial justice and is committed to, in her role as chair of the subcommittee on housing in the Senate, to do work in these areas. I want to share that 2 of the senator's bills to provide additional housing resources to Native American communities, those have passed. We're working on a 3rd to provide additional home ownership resources, as well as a bill that we've had for a while that would provide resources to help with the identification of racial covenants in property records. So a lot of great work. And in the bigger picture, there's been a disappointing setback with Build Back Better and the important resources that would have provided. But I don't want to lose sight of the billions of dollars that have been provided in the American Rescue Plan and now the infrastructure bill that the senator has championed, that will target resources, that will invest and focus resources in disadvantaged communities. So we'll keep working, and thank you all for being here.
Excellent. I have Representative Rena Moran, also Athena Hollins, Dave Pinto, and State Senator John Marty are also available. Rena?
Well, good morning, everyone. I am in agreement with Representative.
Your audio is not coming through, Rena. Rena, can you turn off your video and maybe your audio will come through?
Rena, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. We still can't hear you. All right. I'm going to just, sorry to say, Rena, we couldn't hear you on that one. Senator Marty, Representative Pinto or Hollins?
Sure, I can go quickly, and I'm sorry I had to miss the first hour. I knew I was going to be late, and I appreciate all the good work you're doing. Very valuable, and I'll call out Alice Hausman since she's retiring again because she's been such a leader on this. These issues are so urgent, and every one of the things we're trying, I mean, Senator Smith's office talks about billions of dollars. We have to do it, but the concept of people having safe housing, we're failing. We're failing as a society to address these things. We have to acknowledge that and have to keep fighting hard. We've got a lot of people on this call who care very deeply about it. And all I want to say is I'll do everything I can. And I think a lot of people, both at the state and federal level, care a lot, as well as all the people in the community. Keep up the good work, MICAH. Let me know how I can help. We are failing to address these needs when people are going hungry. And Mike Howard in the House is pointing out very nicely what kind of a surplus, we're calling it a surplus when we have people who are sleeping in tents in the winter in Minnesota. That's not a surplus. That's money we need to address to this. And I hope we can use some of that significant money to make some of these investments that Alice and others have been pushing for so many years. Thanks, and I'll listen.
All right. We are running a little low on time. If Representatives Pinto or Hollins would like to speak.
I'll go real quickly. Just thank you so much for putting this together. So Dave Pinto from the southwest part of St. Paul, and I too need to shout out both Chair Hausman and also my seatmate Representative Herr, who've really been leading on these issues, Representative Chair Hausman for so long. And so I'm just kind of trying to be as supportive as I possibly can to them and to those who've especially specialized in this. I'll note that I was one of the early co-authors of House File 40, which is the big proposal from Chair Hausman and from Representative Howard for rental assistance for families. And then I'm the chair of the Early Childhood Committee in the House. That's been my big focus, has been in the early years. And I want to just highlight for you that Governor Walz yesterday proposed expanding the Homework Starts at Home program of support for families to go to support younger families with younger kids as well. We know that housing instability has a massive negative impact on brain development and child development. And of course, then we all live with the consequences of that for the rest of a child's life. And health consequences and all kinds of other things and opportunity gaps. So I'm squarely focused on that. And then I also work in the county attorney's office for John Choi and can attest to what he was describing and can say that I feel like a lot of my role at the legislature can be to counter some of the narratives that our Republican colleagues are pushing. I just want to highlight my excitement about the child protection proposal to make sure that that's not taken into account when it comes to renting. And if any of my colleagues on the call want to connect on that, any of the legislators, I'd love to do that because I'll be looking into that. That was a great piece that came out of what Janelle had to share earlier. Thank you so much.
All right. And Athena, if you'd like to clean up any final pitches that you want.
I had one last thing to say, which was about the Posse Caucus, but I think Representative Herr really said it just as well as I could have. Just that we're making housing one of our top priorities for the People of Color Indigenous Caucus. And because we know that housing in particular leads to better outcomes in every different area that BIPOC individuals are impacted by, right? Like if we're talking about education disparities, we're talking about healthcare disparities, jobs and employment. I mean, all of it. If you have stable housing and a place to call home, we know that you have better outcomes in those areas. So we're really committed to working on this, and I hope that we can partner with you folks going forward if you have any ideas, to push us forward. So thank you.
Great. I would like to apologize that we had technical problems with Representative Rena Moran. And we've got timing problems because that's always the way it is. So I'm not going to report back on all y'all and kick it back to you, Elaine.
Okay. Thank you very much to all of our elected representatives. It's very impressive what you're trying to do to help with the housing situation, but it's a big job and we need to move forward with it. So as you know, MICAH works to promote the Homes for All agenda in the state legislature, where we have established a number of state legislative priorities. Now, MICAH's director, Sue Watlove Phillips, will tell us more about those priorities. Sue?
Thanks, Elaine. And I think John's going to put up the agenda. And as that's happening, just want to thank you all so much for your incredible work. We are so blessed at MICAH to have you all involved in really caring about our community and wanting to make sure that everyone has a safe, decent, accessible home that is affordable for everyone in our community at the income that they have available. Just a real quick personal note is that I would not be able to rent in St. Paul or in Ramsey County because I have a criminal record and because I also have struggled with alcoholism. And so back in 2012, after many years of struggling with alcoholism, I got hurt and was prescribed a non-narcotic medication, which was actually an opioid, that put my alcoholism into a rage. And I had a car accident. Ended up on probation for 6 years and now have 10 years of sobriety as of Monday. And so I want to say that as a Caucasian, that I get treated very differently in the criminal justice system than people of color, diverse communities. And I think we need to recognize that. And because I'm a homeowner, I don't have to deal with the same issues that folks that don't have as many resources. So I own the home that I grew up in here in Fridley. So I think as we are talking about equity, both racial equity and equity across our system, we need to understand that we all need to be a part of this and that we are all responsible. As a teenager who experienced homelessness and who has spent now over 54 years of my life working on housing and homeless issues to make sure that people have homes, it is critical that we are all responsible for this. So I want to thank Senator Tina Smith and Senator Klobuchar and all our congressional members for the work that they did on the CARES Act and on the American Rescue Plan and on the bipartisan bill that has created incredible resources for us to have here in Minnesota. Want to thank all of you in St. Paul and Ramsey County for putting $74 million of American Rescue Plan dollars and other dollars into creating 1,000 units for people at 30% and below. And for the governor's work and lieutenant governor's work in already putting dollars in for $450 million in safe, affordable housing, infrastructure bonds, general obligation bonds, shelter for capital for shelters, as well as $70 million for veterans. So a lot of really great work is happening. But as you can see, we have a very strong 2022 legislative agenda, and this is not the entire Homes for All legislative agenda. We've had the opportunity at MICAH, not only with our board being half of our board being people that have experienced homelessness and 70% being from diverse communities, to have major impact into public policy, both at the local, state, and on the federal level. Janelle is a great advocate and very actively involved with Homes for All. And as you can see, we want to make sure that we have equitable access and fair treatment, that we want to preserve more homes. We want to build more homes and shelters, home ownership, and expanding that so that people can create wealth. We want to have housing stability and anti-displacement and protect the rights and advancing equity as we are moving forward. There's much more on the MICAH website. I encourage you to go to MICAH.org and go to our policy section, which will give you an incredible amount of information. Currently at the state level, we have $7.7 billion. And I agree, it's not a surplus. It's dollars. It's our dollars that we need to use to invest in housing. Plus, we still have $1.15 billion of American Rescue Plan dollars that we also need to invest too. So I'm going to have John go to the next slide because I know we're short on time and we want to make sure that we get through everything. Mike has been working with families, especially our diverse families that have had their children poisoned by lead paint. We have over 700 children that are poisoned each year in Minnesota. 1 out of every 3 homes in Minnesota has lead paint in it, according to the Department of Health. And most of our lead poisoning comes from lead paint. And while we passed the bipartisan bill and we will get $680 million here in Minnesota to clean up the 260,000 lead pipes that we have carrying drinking water in Minnesota, we also need to make our homes safe from lead paint too. And we want to be very proactive in getting into homes, testing them, and encapsulating them. By doing that, we help save our kids' lives from being brain damaged and doing so that they can do well. And obviously, we know that kids that have brain damage have a hard time following rules, and they oftentimes get stuck into the criminal justice system too. And no fault of their own, they just don't understand what's going on because we've allowed them to be hurt by not having safe homes. We also know that for it only costs about $2,500 per unit to make a unit lead safe, yet it will cost us $100,000 per year per child for the rest of their life in taxpayer dollars that we allow our children to get poisoned and have their brains damaged, as well as the damage to them, to their family, and not reaching all the great potential that God has created them to be. So I encourage you to be involved with us as we move forward in trying to pass this bill, and thank Representative Hausman, Chair Hausman, for her incredible work on this bill. We're going to go to the next slide very quickly and ask you to call Senator Draheim, he's the chair of the Housing Committee, and ask him to have a hearing on the lead safe home bill and to really help us move this as we are also moving replacing the lead pipes for clean drinking water, which he does very strongly support. Representative Hausman is here, has been a strong proponent of this bill, and we thank her for getting it into the conference committee many years. But we also want you to call Senator Jeremy Miller, who's the majority leader in the Senate, as well as Representative Melissa Portman, who is the Speaker of the House, and really to push that we use these dollars, our dollars. They're not surplus because there's dollars that we need to meet the basic needs of folks in our community. Use them now, invest them in making sure that everyone has a safe, decent, accessible home, as well as to use the American Rescue Plan dollars. So thank you all so much for being here with us. And I know we still have a few more things to get through on the agenda, so I want to pass it back to John.
All right. So Alice Hausman has been all these, has been many things, and Elaine Terone is going to be able to speak to that. Elaine?
Yes, thank you. Last and certainly by no means least, it is my great pleasure today to showcase Alice Hausman, to recognize her outstanding contributions in the Minnesota State Legislature. Today, we're pleased to honor Alice Hausman with the MICAH Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you, Alice, for your many achievements in support of housing as a member of the House of Representatives in this state. A former teacher, you were first sworn in 1989, and you have far too many achievements to list now at the end of your 3 decades and at the end of our breakfast hour. But suffice it to say that finance, funding, and legislation to support affordable housing for all have always been your central achievements. But one of the best things about Alice, I have to say, is her supportive human touch. Janelle Freeman Anderson tells this story about Alice. A couple of years ago, when Janelle was nervously preparing to testify before the legislature to demand justice for the unhoused, and she was going over her notes, Alice stopped her. She told Janelle, "No, don't read your notes, just speak from your heart." So, greatly relieved, Janelle did speak from her heart. And when she finished, Janelle reports that she received a standing ovation. Alice Hausman encouraged Janelle to be herself in pursuing justice, just as she has encouraged so many of her constituents. Alice, you're the best. Congratulations. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you very much. Got to make sure I'm unmuted. It has been just a pleasure to be with you this last hour and a half and to be motivated yet again. I can tell you, in my last year, I have one more year. I am more motivated than ever to deliver an incredible package for housing. And that includes certainly some policy that we've talked about, but also massive funding. In the last budget go round, housing and agriculture received the smallest. Our leaders decide what our budget targets are, and then we have to write our budgets based on that. And housing and ag got the smallest target. I have to tell you, we can't let that happen again. But here is the wonderful partnership I have. Massive numbers, in addition to the Homes for All Coalition and MICAH and others. This year, we have a campaign, Bring It Home, Minnesota. And I met with them yesterday. They are asking for $2 billion. $2 billion. And and I have to tell you, they say that's probably not enough, but we have to build and restore housing. We have to do rental assistance and down payment assistance. They tell the story. 31 organizations are organizing around the Bring It Home campaign. I am motivated like heck to deliver on that agenda this year. That's what we all need to work together to accomplish.
Thank you, Alice. I'm looking forward to this last year. Let it be the crown in your panoply. Okay, John, I'm going to turn to you to close.
All right. Frederick Douglass told us power concedes nothing without a demand. And whether we do it politely on the phone or with signs in the street or in small conversations, we have to demand that all of our systems and organizations do what is necessary to guarantee everyone, without exception, has a safe, decent, affordable, and accessible home. There are just a few opportunities for change to make those demands. Please take a look at any of our other legislative breakfasts, but also the Homes for All annual launch on February 2nd. The link's at the top. And we've long been part of the Joint Religious Legislative Conference Day on the Hill coming up on Tuesday, March 15th, and there's preparatory workshops for that. I would just like to say also thank you to all of the folks who are on the screen who have made this possible. And that is the end of our official presentation.